Most people think a Rolex is the peak of watchmaking. It isn't even close. In fact, to the people who actually live at the top of this world. The collectors, the dealers, the families who've been buying serious watches for generations. A Rolex is basically the entry ticket. It's where the conversation starts, not where it ends. And here's what makes this interesting. Two people can both call themselves watch collectors. One spent $12,000 on a steel submariner. The other spent $4 million on a minute repeater that took 3 years to build and will never appear in a catalog. Same hobby, completely different universe. So in this video, I'm going to break down the 7 levels of luxury watches. From the first real watch purchase all the way up to one-of-one commissioned pieces that don't officially exist. Because most people think this is a market about telling time. It isn't. It's a market about identity, access, and in some cases, generational wealth. Let's get into it. Every serious collector starts somewhere, and level 1 is where most people first cross the line from a fashion watch into something real. We're talking brands like Tissot, Longines, Hamilton, and Tag Heuer at the lower end. Watches that are mechanically legitimate, Swiss-made, properly engineered, built to last, but still accessible enough that buying one doesn't require a financial decision. The Tissot PRX, the Longines Master Collection, the Hamilton Khaki Field. These are watches that watch people actually respect. They're not status symbols, they're signals, quiet ones, that say you know what you're doing. At this level, you're buying your first mechanical movement. You're learning what an automatic means. You're starting to understand why a watch with 120 years of heritage sells for more than one with a celebrity on the poster. Most people stay here for a year or two. Some stay here forever. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people discover something at level 1 that surprises them. They realize the watch isn't just a watch. And that's when things start getting expensive. This is where Rolex lives. And when I say Rolex, I mean the core models. The submarine. Now here's the thing about Rolex that most people don't fully understand. Rolex is not at the top of the watchmaking hierarchy. What Rolex is, and what it does better than almost anyone, is manufacture at scale with near-perfect consistency. Every Rolex is COSC certified. Every Rolex is tested in-house. The tolerances are extraordinarily tight for what is ultimately a mass-produced product. But mass-produced is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Rolex makes roughly 1 million watches a year. That sounds like a lot, until you realize there are 8 billion people on Earth and a 2 to 4 year waiting list for a steel sports model at most authorized dealers. At level 2, you're also looking at Tudor, Rolex's sister brand and genuinely excellent, along with Omega, which sits right alongside Rolex in terms of heritage and arguably beats it on movement innovation. The Omega Speedmaster went to the moon. The Seamaster is Bond's watch. These are legitimate icons. What changes at level 2 isn't just price, it's retention. A Rolex Submariner bought today will, in most market conditions, hold its value better than a new car. Some will appreciate. And that shift, from consumption to asset, is what starts pulling people deeper into this world. This is where the conversation gets more interesting, and where the casual buyer drops off. At level 3, you're entering brands that don't run Super Bowl ads. Jaeger-LeCoultre, IWC, Panerai, Breitling, Zenith, A-Lang and Sony at the top end of this range. These are brands built for people who already know watches. They don't need to explain themselves to anyone who doesn't. What you're buying here is depth. A Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso has been in production since 1931. The case physically flips over. It was designed so polo players could protect the dial during a match. That's not a marketing story. That's actual history. An IWC Porcheser has one of the cleanest, most architecturally satisfying dials in watchmaking. A Zenith El Primero movement is historically significant. It was one of the first automatic chronograph calibers ever made in 1969, and Zenith famously hid the tooling from management rather than scrap it when quartz watches threatened the industry. These are watches with stories. And at level 3, the story is part of what you're paying for. A-Lang and Sony deserves a special mention here. German, not Swiss. Made in Glashütte. Every single movement is assembled, tested, disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled before it leaves the factory. The finishing on a Lange movement, the German silver plates, the hand-engraved balance cock, is something you can spend 20 minutes looking at under a loupe and still not fully appreciate. Lange starts around $20,000, and it is worth every cent. At level 4, you've crossed a line most people don't even know exists. This is the beginning of proper haute horlogerie, high watchmaking. Brands like Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Audemars Piguet, the Holy Trinity. Here's the thing about the Holy Trinity. Each one represents a different philosophy. Audemars Piguet is the disruptor. The Royal Oak, designed by Gerald Genta in 1972, was the watch that proved a stainless steel sports watch could sell for more than a gold dress watch. It broke the rules of the industry at the time. Today, an AP Royal Oak in steel starts around $30,000 at retail. retail and trades on the secondary market for significantly more. Vacheron Constantin is the purest. Founded in 1755, it's the oldest watch manufacturer in continuous operation in the world. They've never stopped making watches. Not through wars, not through the Great Depression, not through the quartz crisis. That continuity matters to a certain kind of collector. And then there's Patek Philippe. Patek is in its own category, even within the Holy Trinity. The brand's tagline is famous. You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. That's not marketing copy. That's a mission statement. Patek makes roughly 60,000 watches a year. They are selective about who buys their most important pieces, and their watches, historically, have outperformed almost any other luxury asset on the secondary market over the long run. At level 4, you're not just buying a watch. You're entering a community of dealers, collectors, auction specialists that operates on relationships as much as money. Buying an expensive watch is one thing. Owning it is another. Servicing a complicated mechanical watch costs between $1,000 and $5,000 every 3 to 5 years. Insurance on a collection adds up fast. Storage. Proper storage, climate-controlled, secured. Matters more than most people expect. And then there's the question of liquidity. A watch is not cash. If you need to convert a $200,000 watch into money quickly, you're almost certainly selling it at a loss, either to a dealer at wholesale or at auction with an 25% buyer's premium on top. The serious collectors at level 5 and above know this. They're not buying watches as investments in the traditional sense. They're buying them as stores of value, as cultural artifacts, as things worth owning on their own terms. The financial dimension is real, but it's secondary to the conviction that these objects matter. Keep that in mind as we go higher. At level 5, price is no longer the primary filter. Access is. This is the world of grand complications. Watches that don't just tell time but perform feats of mechanical engineering that, when you understand what's happening inside the case, are genuinely astonishing. A perpetual calendar tracks the date, day, month, and leap year cycle automatically. No adjustment needed until the year 2100. Inside a watch smaller than a walnut, a tourbillon counteracts the effect of gravity on the movement's balance wheel by mounting it in a rotating cage. It was patented in 1801. And watchmakers are still refining it. A minute repeater chimes the time. Hours, quarter hours, minutes. Using tiny hammers striking gongs inside the case, activated by a push of a slide on the side. The acoustics are tuned by hand. The sound is one of the most beautiful things in mechanical engineering, and making one correctly takes years of skill. At level 5, the watches you're looking at: Patek Grand Complications, Vacheron Traditionnel High Complications, Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Concept Series, are made in tiny numbers, some in dozens per year, some fewer. And here's where the dynamic starts to shift. At level 4, you go to the boutique and buy a watch. At level 5, you start having a different conversation. The brand starts to ask questions back. How long have you been a client? What have you bought before? What's your relationship with the Maison? That shift, from customer to client, defines everything above this level. Level 6 is not a market you enter. It's a market you're invited into. At this level, we're talking about pieces that are allocated, meaning the brand decides who gets them, regardless of willingness to pay. Having the money is necessary, but not sufficient. You need history with the brand. You need relationships. In some cases, you need someone already inside the inner circle to advocate for you. Patek's most complicated pieces, things like the Grandmaster Chime, the Sky Moon Tourbillon, fall into this tier. The Grandmaster Chime, for context, has 20 complications. It takes years to produce. It strikes the time, the date, the alarm, and a grand sonnery, all from a case that can be worn on the wrist. When one came to auction at Only Watch in 2019, it sold for 31 million CHF. That's the record for any watch ever sold at auction. FP Journe is another name at this level. Independent, uncompromising, and increasingly impossible to acquire. François-Paul Journe makes roughly 900 watches a year across his entire collection. Total. He's turned down buyout offers from luxury conglomerates repeatedly. His waiting lists are years long for certain references. Collectors who got into Journe early are sitting on pieces that have tripled and quadrupled in value. Not because they planned it that way, but because genuine scarcity and genuine quality eventually find their price. Then there's Richard Mille, technically positioned here and at level 7. Richard Mille watches look like nothing else in watchmaking. Skeletal, architectural, built from materials like carbon TPT and titanium. They were originally designed for athletes. Rafael Nadal wore one during a Grand Slam. Jackie Chan wore one through an action sequence. They're engineered to survive conditions that would destroy anything else. They also start around $80,000 for entry models and scale up to several million for limited editions. And the weightless situation is, by most accounts, worse than Rolex. Level 7 doesn't have a catalog. It doesn't have a website page. It doesn't have a waiting list. It has a conversation, one you have to earn the right to have. At level 7, we're talking about one-of-one commissioned pieces. Watches made for a single client, to their exact specification, by the very best craftspeople in the world. The client may specify the complication, the case material, painted in enamel by a miniaturist who trained for a decade, the engravings, the inscriptions. Patek's advanced research department operates at this level. So does the Atelier at Vacheron's Le Cabinetiers division, which exists specifically to execute commissions of this kind. Their most complex piece to date took 8 years to build. It has 57 complications. One of them tracks the positions of the planets. At level 7, the watch is no longer a product. It's closer to a portrait, an object made for one person, reflecting something about who they are, how they see themselves, and what they want to leave behind. There are pieces at this level that will never appear at auction. They'll pass through estates, through generations, through private sales between collectors who never make the transaction public. At level 1, you choose the watch. At level 7, the watch is built for you, and it will outlast you. Here's the thing about this market that most people miss. Watches survived the quartz crisis, when cheap, accurate battery-powered movements nearly destroyed the Swiss industry in the 1970s and 80s. They survived because people decided that accuracy wasn't the point. Mechanical watchmaking survived because it meant something that a quartz movement never could. A mechanical watch is a purely human thing. It runs on tension and physics and the accumulated craft knowledge of hundreds of years. There's no battery, no circuit, just engineering at a scale you can hold in your hand. And at the top levels of this world, the people commissioning these pieces aren't buying timekeeping. They're buying the proof that something this extraordinary can still be made by hand, one at a time, for someone who cares enough to ask for it. That's what the levels are really about, not price, not status. Access to something made with full intention, for someone specific, by people who've dedicated their lives to getting it exactly right. If this changed how you think about watches, or about the market underneath them, subscribe to Scale Brief. Every video is a breakdown of a world most people see from the outside, but never fully understand. Next week, we're going into private islands, from $3,000 a night rentals all the way up to self-governing island territories that operate outside any country's jurisdiction. You won't want to miss it. See you there.